because you need to hear a lecture. So I'm sure you all got a chance to see today that Professor Newby is quite a good public speaker. And he is privileged actually to teach at a very prestigious college in America, Morehouse College, one of the original black colleges and universities in America, which have now been recognized as some of the finest educational institutions in America. And we call them the historically black colleges and universities, where he continues that great African-American tradition of excellent speaking. Please welcome Tim Newby.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch, and good afternoon. Today's lecture is about public speaking. And the first thing I want to encourage you to do is I'm going to give a lot of detailed points and tips about public speaking. So I want you to do a couple of things. One, I want you to take notes. Two, don't feel compelled that you have to master every detail that I'm going to give you. Think of more of the guidelines, suggestions, things to do right. I'll talk about things to do wrong when you're doing any type of public speaking. And really the public speaking tips I'm going to give apply not only to debate, but they apply to any form of public speaking that you may engage in. The key is when you're becoming a public speaker and you're developing your public speaking skills is number one, you want to be authentic. You want to be yourself. Don't try to be someone who you're not. And when you first start off as a debater or as a public speaker, you might not know who you are as a speaker. And that's okay. So what you should do is you hear things that say, well, you know what, I like that. Or this speaker did something and I think that's me. That resembles something that I like, that resembles a characteristic of my personality. Take that with you. Learn from other great speakers. One thing you might notice about great speakers, take, for example, President Obama, former President Sarkozy of France, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They're all great speakers, but they all have very different speaking styles. So there's no one way to be a great public speaker. So what I want to encourage you to do is first and foremost is to find your own voice as a speaker. And I'm going to try to give you some tips and some guidelines on how to do that, on ways that you can help become a good public speaker. Three other things that characterize a good public speaker would be, one, they have to be confident. And if you're not confident as a public speaker, you can at least appear to be confident. In other words, never let them see you sweat. So even if you don't know what you're talking about, you should never show the audience that you don't know what you're talking about. You want to project confidence in everything that you're saying. Next, you want to be organized, which means you want to have structure and watch your time management. And I'm actually doing that right now with this lecture. I'll give you 50 minutes, cut down from an hour actually for this lecture. So I have my timekeeper right here so that I can make sure that I'm staying organized and I'm watching my time. And you want to do that for any public speech that you give because there are always time constraints. And then particularly in debate, you're limited in the amount of time that you have for that speech. So if you want it to be good, you have to manage your time effectively so that you get all your points in that you want to make. And then finally, you need to have a strong delivery. And I'm going to talk about what it takes to create a strong delivery. Today, relax. This is a learning environment. So following this lecture, we're going to have practice exercises where you'll have the opportunity to engage in some practice speeches. It's okay to make mistakes. In fact, we want to encourage you to make as many mistakes as you want to here today, because then you'll see that you're going to go through the learning process, and by the end of the week, when you get to the tournament, you're going to see how much you've grown as a speaker from today. So don't be nervous about that you're, I'm not a great public speaker, or I want to impress my friends, or I want to impress the trainers. That's not what this is all about. This is about learning how to become a better public speaker. So how do we do that? I think the first thing we have to do is try to become a dynamic public speaker. Because dynamism, that's what it's all about. So in other words, you don't want to give a boring speech. If I stand here and I do certain things or I don't do certain things and you're bored, that's not a good thing. You want to have a speech that's interesting throughout. In order to keep your speech interesting and dynamic, you want to do three things. One, you want to use variation, change. You don't want to stay the same. You don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again. You're going to change your pace. You're going to change your volume of speaking. You're going to change the tone in your voice. You're going to use different hand gestures. If I use the same hand gesture, for example, throughout this whole speech, eventually it looks like I'm hitting something that's in the midair, right? It wouldn't be an effective hand gesture. But if I use the same gesture to make one point, and then maybe I use a different hand gesture, maybe a different hand, to make a different point, now that variation is what's going to keep the audience interested and stimulated. Secondly, you want to use emphasis, right? Emphasis with your voice. You want to connect the emphasis that you're using with your body and your physical movements to the emphasis that you're putting on certain words when you enunciate or you articulate certain words. It's the combination of using the emphasis and the variation that makes speeches interesting. See how I did that? You see how I'm moving? And I'm saying interesting. So my body movement is even interesting as I'm saying it. So it helps you connect the words to the physical movement because I'm illustrating the words that I'm actually speaking. And that's very helpful as a speaker. Number 3 is naturalness. So this again, you're going to hear me repeat this several times throughout this lecture. Don't do things that are unnatural to you. You want to be yourself. And here's the reason why you don't want to do things that are unnatural to you. It's going to show. If you do something that's unnatural, if you try to speak in a different voice, for example, if I started speaking like this, you'd say, well, what is wrong with Professor Newton? Something doesn't sound right. Something is off because it's not natural. So you want to try to relax, take a deep breath, and just be yourself and just sort of talk to the audience. Talk to the crowd almost as if you were talking to a neighbor, a friend, or a relative. But then you're going to do some very intentional things in order to make your speech a great public speech. And so I'm going to have 6 big picture tips, and there are going to be a lot of little points under my 6 tips. But essentially, I'm going to have 6 tips about what you need to do to become a great public speaker. If you follow these 6 tips, I promise you, you'll have nothing to fear from any public address that you may give. Tip number 1, use your voice as an instrument and your body to communicate words. I've sort of talked about this already, but you want to do that a few ways. 1, use your voice volume. So sometimes during your speech, you may want to talk softly to kind of draw the crowd in. See, when I lower my voice volume, what does it make you want to do? It makes you want to lean forward, actually, to try to hear what I'm saying. And then sometimes you want to pick up your voice. That kind of wakes up the crowd. If you think they're kind of falling asleep on your point, you might want to pick up your voice, the volume of your voice, and project it to sort of wake the audience up and inject some type of energy. Secondly, you want to vary the pitch of your voice. You know, the pitch of your voice, again, your voice is kind of like an instrument. For those of you who may sing, you may play an instrument, just like instruments play in different tones and different octaves. You can also work your voice into different octaves. It takes some time to learn your voice as a speaker. So that's one of those things that's going to come with time. But as you start to learn sort of the pitch of your own voice, some people have a naturally higher pitched voice, which means that they can get more words out because their pitch of their voice is higher. Some people have a lower pitched voice, which means when they speak, their words are bigger. So they tend to speak in shorter sentences and they need to speak more concisely. So you have to learn the pitch of your own voice and learn how to vary it in order to enable you to do what you need to do in the speech. And that sort of goes along with varying your tone as well. Next, you want to think about your speed of delivery. And I always say, keep it simple. Take your time during your speech. You want to balance it. You don't want to rush through a speech so that the audience doesn't understand what you're saying. Because that's what happens when you speak too quickly. Conversely, if you speak too slowly, people start to think, maybe you're a little slow. Maybe you don't really know what you're talking about. So you don't want to speak too slow. You don't want to speak too quick. You want to try to find the right pace, and you want to vary that pace to your advantage. Next, you want to use dramatic pauses within your speech. So sometimes it's very effective to, after you've concluded on a very strong point, to pause. And let that point sink in. Did you see what I did there? I paused. To let that point sink in to the crowd and to the audience as to what you made. That's particularly effective if you're dealing with complicated subject matter and you just explain something that's very complicated. You want to take your time and inject pauses into your speech to allow the audience that time, instead of again, to write down what you're saying and to connect with you so that they can get it. Next, you want to use hand gestures. You don't want to use too many hand gestures. If you notice, everything I'm saying is about balance. If you use too many hand gestures, what does this look like?
Trying to fly.
I'm trying to fly. Maybe I'm trying to direct traffic. It's not effective for public speaking. Conversely, if you see me stand and give a speech like this throughout the whole speech, how does that look? Does this look good to you? You can speak out. It's okay. Does this look good? No. I look terrified. I look frozen. I look like a statue. Statues don't give good speeches. So you want to use hand gestures, but you don't want to use excessive hand gestures when you're speaking. Try to be conscious of what you're doing when you're speaking. You want to try to become a conscious speaker. One who's doing everything that you're doing with intention, with a short seconds of forethought. So that if you're using a hand gesture, it's because you're intending to use that hand gesture to make that point. If you're varying your pitch or your tone or your volume, you're intentionally doing that in order to connect with the message that you're bringing from your speech. And so you can make all of these things sort of work together. So giving a speech is kind of like conducting a symphony orchestra. But your mouth is the instrument, and your body is another organ, another vessel for that delivery. Next, most importantly, I love doing this in speeches, you want to make good eye contact with your audience or with your judges. If you have a large audience like this, you want to try to look, I always say, probably to a 45-degree angle to the left, find a point in the center you like, and then find another 45-degree angle to the right, so that you're looking at the entire audience. And a powerful thing happens when you make eye contact with your audience. It makes the audience connect with you, feel you more as a speaker. So you want to look directly into the eyes of your audience. That's what I'm doing right now. And by doing that, if I'm looking down all the time, imagine this. Imagine I'm delivering this whole lecture looking down. All you see is the top of my ball. That's not going to be a very effective technique for delivering a speech. So you want to make good eye contact. Next, you want to have facial expressions, because even the muscles in your face can express powerful messages. For example, if you're making a very serious point in your speech and you're evoking anger in the speech, your face shouldn't do this. Right? You don't want to smile when you're making a very serious point. Say you're talking about someone who's advocating a policy which would kill children. Imagine I make the point, yes, your policy will kill children. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. So you want to make sure that your facial expressions match what you're doing in your speech, because all of these things work together to make you an effective public speaker. Lastly, you want to think about your body movement, and I've sort of mixed posture in here. Within a debate, generally, you're probably going to use body movement pretty sparingly. In most debates, you're going to be either standing at a table delivering your speech, or you're going to be standing at a podium or a lectern like this one giving your speech. In some public venues, when you're public speaking, you will have occasion to move, and that's okay. I think movement is best when you're transitioning from point A to point B. But you don't want to be in the habit of doing this when you're giving a speech. You see what I'm doing? What am I doing? Yell it out, please. I'm pacing, right? I'm walking back and forth. Looks like I might not even know what my next point is. I might not even really know what I'm doing. You don't want to communicate that to the audience. You want to communicate a sense of strength and confidence throughout your entire speech. So you don't want to just pace back and forth. If you do decide you want to have some body movement in your speech, make that body movement conscious, make it intentional, and have it go along with the point. The other thing you want to do is make sure you stand with a strong and erect posture. So if I deliver my speech like this, what am I doing? I'm slouched over. You're not going to take me as seriously as if I deliver it like this. So you want to have a strong, upright, erect posture. And then lastly, you want to think about your overall appearance. And, there are different opinions, I think, on this point. But, I'll just say that I think it matters how you look. And I think you want to try to have a professional appearance generally if you're giving a public speaking engagement. I think appearance matters, and I think when you don't have a good public appearance, it takes away from your presentation. So in other words, if I walked and give this speech and my shirt's out, I had stains all over my shirt, and I'm just generally look like a sloppy mess, I think it detracts away from the speech. That's my opinion. Okay, so that's tip number one. Tip number two, Choose your language carefully and quickly. Choose your language carefully and quickly. Let's talk a little bit about word choice when we're delivering public speeches. I think the first thing you have to do is avoid crutch words and filler language. So words like right? What are you trying to do when you go Trying to buy more time to think of your next thought because you really don't know what you want to say next. A good way to sort of counteract that at first when you just start delivering public speeches is turn those ums or those filler words into dramatic pauses. In other words, if I'm searching for my next thought and I pause, that's dramatically different than if I'm searching for my next thought and I go during the pause. Right? So you can become a much more effective speaker just by substituting a dramatic pause for an or any other filler word that you may use. You'll find that the more speeches you give, you'll start to learn every speaker has his or her own individual speech tics or things that they like to say. Some speakers say like a lot. I have some speakers on my debate team who like to say the phrase moving onwards. Every time they make a new point, they say and onwards and onwards. And eventually you're thinking, I wish you would go onwards from using this phrase. So try to avoid crutch words and filler language. Next, you want to try to use evocative and colorful language as opposed to simple words. And this does not mean that you don't use simple words in your speech. You do, because you want to express your ideas clearly. But you have to balance that with using words that are going to keep what you're saying interesting to the audience. For example, I could say, this person's traveling down a road living a mediocre life, right? You get the point, it's pretty simple. Or I could say this person is meandering through a maze of mediocrity. Right? Use colorful language, descriptive language that evokes emotion, that makes you feel the passion within the point. So think about that. When you're thinking about how you can say things, we're going to, even after we finish this training, you might want to do some practice speeches one way and then make the same points using different language. And see how you can use the same language, you can use different language to make the same points and the different sort of emotions and effects. Next in your language choice, you want to think about various slogans, rhetorical framing, sort of powerful words, emphasis words that you can use, and also sort of poetical elements within your speech. One poetical device that I like to use is alliteration. Right? Everyone know what alliteration is? Train if you know what alliteration is. Okay, I'll explain it. So alliteration is basically when you're using the same consonant sound. So if the first letter of the word is, say, an M, then your words are using a lot of M's to make the same point. So I might make meaningful movement, right? I'm using alliteration within that sentence because you hear the consistent M sound within that speech. That makes the speech more interesting. So think about things like that when you're using, when you're thinking about your word choice. Now, as much as you want to use poetical elements, don't go to the other end of the spectrum. You don't want to turn your speech into a rap. I'm not suggesting you should turn your speeches into rap, so you should turn your speeches into poetry. It's better to incorporate variation and balance with all of these techniques that I'm suggesting. Next, and this is a very effective technique, particularly in debate, you want to try to use rhetorical comparisons. We do not want this, but we do want that. We believe this, but we don't believe that. We believe that there's no principle higher than individual rights. And we believe that even if you compare individual rights to the value of life, life comes second. So you want to try to use comparisons within your speech to compare things in your word choices. Next, within your word choice, be mindful that your word choice is not offensive. In other words, you don't want to be disrespectful to your opponents. They're smart. Their ideas are meritorious. They have merit. And if they don't, I'm sure you'll explain in the debate why they do not. So there's no need to show a disrespect for your opponents with the language that you choose. In other words, you want to stay away from insulting language. You want to stay away from disrespectful language. That's actually, we might have an elective towards the end on fallacies. It's actually a fallacy, a logical fallacy to attack the person as opposed to attacking the argument. It's called an add-on attack. So you want to be cruel to ideas, but not cruel to people. So encourage, reject the ideas that have been presented by your opponents, but don't reject your opponents, right? And after the debate, you want to try to be friends. You'll probably see people again after the debates. And believe me, if you insult someone in a debate, they're going to remember it. They're going to remember it a lot more than they're going to remember you just being respectful, actually. Remember this old adage my brother always tells me. People may not remember what you say, but they always remember how you make them feel. So be mindful of that when you're choosing your words in the context of a public speech. Tip number 3. Every public speaker should strive to meet at least 3 goals. Clear, credible, and memorable. You want to strive for those 3 goals in every debate speech that you give. You want to have clarity and you want to have comprehension. In other words, you want the audience to understand what you have just said. You fail as a speaker if you haven't delivered a message that people can understand. So don't get caught up with using so much flowery rhetoric and body gestures and all these things and forget to see the forest through the trees. Remember that your first obligation is to deliver a clear speech. Second, it needs to be credible. And a good delivery makes the audience sort of want to believe you. And when you're giving a strong, confident, powerful speech that sort of follows all these guidelines, the audience wants to believe you. They want to be with you. And that's what you want when you're delivering a public address. And you don't want to do anything that's going to assassinate your credibility as a speaker. So what kind of things am I talking about? You don't want to state things that aren't true. You don't want to make up facts. Why? That's going to take away from your credibility as a speaker, especially if you get called upon it by your opponents, because your opponents are well read and they know that what you just said is not true, that you just basically made it up to try to make it a good argument into a debate round. Don't do that. You want to say things that you know, to be confident in what you're saying, and you want to maintain your credibility as a speaker. And then finally, memorability. You want the audience to remember what you said, and this is a tricky thing. This is not something that anyone can master in one day. In fact, I think a memorable speech is something that really is a combination of all of these various things. It's a combination of having something that's interesting, delivering interesting subject matter, delivering good analysis, doing it in a strong, verbally evocative way. But if you do all these things, then your speech will be memorable, and that's something that you want. Tip number 4. You want to project a great personality. You want to project a great personality. Why? Because good speakers project an engaging personality to the audience, and they do that because an attractive personality makes people want to like you. They make people want to like your speech. In other words, if you think someone is a good person, a likable person, you're halfway there on the person actually enjoying your speech. So, what is a good personality, public personality? What are the traits of those? What does that look like? I think there are a few things that make that up. Let's call it 4 things. First, sincerity. As a speaker, you have to show genuine concern for your subject matter and its importance to the audience. If you're giving a speech and you're insincere in your beliefs, it's going to show. So oftentimes, I know sometimes you have to debate things that you may have to debate one side of the motion that you really don't agree with, right? Those are the times when it challenges your ability to be sincere as a public speaker, because you're thinking, I really don't agree with this. The only reason I'm on this side of the motion is because I'm in this debate, I'm at this debate tournament, and I want to win, so I'm going to make these arguments, but I really don't believe anything I'm about to say. So what do? Well, what I suggest you do is try to connect your arguments with something that you do believe in. I think if you think critically and carefully, especially about values that may underline a proposition, you're going to come up with things that you do believe that you can agree with. You're going to come up with, if you take it back to principles, you're going to be able to find reasons, examples, analogies that you do believe in that can support your argument that you can say. And use those things, because if you use those examples and those things and those principles that you believe in to advance your position, then you can exhibit that sincerity, even for the side of a proposition that you may not really agree with. Second, congeniality, or friendliness. And that's kind of derived from a special sort of warmth for people, but I think there are a couple subtle ways to do this during a speech. Like, when you look at the audience, you don't want to look at the audience with disdain. I mean, it's one thing if you're making a point, a very serious point, you have a serious face. It's another thing if you're giving a speech as if you hate the people you're speaking to. So you want to find the balance of being a speaker of someone who cares about the audience. And you want to project that caring, that sort of sense of empathy for the audience and for the subject matter that you're discussing. When you're able to project that empathy also for the subject matter that you're discussing, that makes you a more likable person. Because everyone likes people that care, generally. We don't like people who don't care about things. So think about that as a speaker. Be considerate, be kind, don't hurt people's feelings in debate. That should be, sort of use your common sense. That's the best way I can sort of sum it up. Don't leave your common sense at the door when you're giving a public speech. You also want to try to use, if you can, because not everyone can do this, a sense of humor. There's nothing wrong with having a sense of humor, using wit to make your points, using sarcasm done tastefully within a debate to make your points. In fact, it can actually be a very powerful technique of persuasion. But you want to do it in balance. Again, you keep hearing me talk about balance, but you want to do it in balance. In other words, you don't want your speech to be a comedy routine, right? Because you're giving a serious speech and you want people to take your subject matter seriously. Okay. Tip number 5, developing a pleasing voice. Developing a pleasing voice. You want to try to develop an effective, pleasing voice. What's a pleasing voice? A pleasing voice is just what it sounds like. It's a voice that people want to hear. It's a voice that when people hear it, they say, oh, I don't know what else you're going to say, but I sure like the way you speak. So whatever you're going to say, I want to hear it. That's the type of voice that you want to try to work to develop. And great public speakers, they know this. And they do this all the time within their speaking. And they have a few ways that they do it. So you too can develop a pleasing voice. It won't happen overnight. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. But let me talk about some ways you can do that. First, you have to have ample breath support. What does that mean? That means if I'm giving a speech, like I just ran a track meet, it's probably not going to be very effective. My voice is not going to be very pleasing if I sound like I'm out of breath. Next, you want to try to have an open and relaxed throat. So you want to try to relax your throat muscles, and so you can open up your voice and in order to allow it to be heard. And the one thing that's surprising to all speakers is the first time you ever hear yourself recorded. If you've never heard yourself played back on a recording, when you go home, find a device, computer, whatever you can. Our phones have technology that allows us to record a voicemail to yourself. Listen to your voice. You will be surprised at what you sound like. You don't sound like, I promise you this, you don't sound like what you think you sound like. And so part of becoming a good speaker and developing a good voice is first understanding what it is you sound like. And then once you start to hear yourself as a speaker and what you sound like, then you can begin to control it. And then you can begin to make it intentional so you sound like what you want to sound like, not just how you happen to sound. Next, you want to sort of have, you want to open your jaw muscles adequately. You want to have energetic use of your lips, your teeth, your tongue. You basically want to use all the muscles. You have a lot of muscles in your face. You have a lot of muscles in your mouth that create your speaking voice. And everyone's voice is unique. I mean, voices are like fingerprints. So there's not one way to speak. There's not one pleasing voice. Just like there are hundreds of beautiful singers in the world, thousands. There are thousands upon thousands of beautiful speakers. And you too can become a beautiful speaker if you learn to train your voice in a way so that you deliver a pleasant speech. Okay, tip number 6. Tip number 6. And this may not apply to all of you, but it may apply to some, so I want to address the issue. Dealing with the fear of public speaking. Dealing with the fear of public speaking. Now I know this probably doesn't apply to anyone in this room. Everyone in this room is probably a very confident public speaker, not afraid of a crowd, could step in front of 5,000 people and just deliver a speech. No problem, no fear, no concerns at all. But for the rest of us, and myself is included, there may be times where you find yourself having a little bit of fear, a little nervousness, a little trepidation, a little hesitation before you give a public speech. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with it? I'm scared. I have to give this speech. Yeah, I have some arguments, but I'm scared. And that's interfering with my ability to do all these wonderful things Professor Doobie told me I should do. Yes, I know I should do these things, I practice these things, but I'm scared. So what do I do? Number 1, accept that it is natural and normal to be scared. I will confess, before I came here, I was nervous. So I'm coming to Cameroon. I've never been to Cameroon before. I'm meeting students I've never seen before. I'm speaking in front of maybe faculty, dignitaries who I don't know. Of course, it's natural. I want you to have a good impression of me. And that's natural for you to want as a speaker. It's natural for you to want to leave your audience with a good impression of you. So that's where some of that fear comes from. So accept, first of all, that that's natural and it's normal. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you for having a little fear and a little nervousness. But don't let it consume you. I like to say you want to use that as fire for the underbelly of your speech. How do you do that? I think first you should find comfort in your preparation. Know that whether you had 15 minutes to prepare for that debate, or whether you had hours because you knew that you were going to give this speech a week before or a day before, or whether you only had 7 minutes because the speaker before you just made some arguments that you weren't prepared for, you didn't know. Whatever amount of time that you had to prepare and take those notes, take comfort in that preparation. Take comfort in that preparation. Because 9 times out of 10, you probably know more than who? Probably know more than your audience. Who's just sitting there listening and being receptive to the message. So be comfortable in the fact that you have taken some time and you have prepared. And because you've taken that time to be prepared to give your speech, you're going to be just fine. Next. Okay, I know I'm prepared, Professor Newby. I'm taking comfort in that preparation, but I am blushing. My mouth is dry. My heart is beating. I'm sweating. This is not helping. What do I do? Number 1, take a deep breath. It's okay to take a deep breath. And relax. And relax. Different people have different ways of relaxing. Some people stretch to relax. Some people may meditate. Some people may say a prayer to help calm them. Whatever you do in your normal life to relax, take a moment before your speech and do it. And relax. I promise you, it will be okay. Your audience has probably heard a worse speech, and maybe they've heard a better one. And if you're in between, you're okay. So relax. It's going to be all right. Next, believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. I cannot stress this enough when you're giving any public speech or a speech in a debate. You have to believe in yourself that you can and you will do a good job. I can tell you that all of your trainers here today, we all believe in you. We all believe that everyone in this room has the ability to become not just a good debater, but a great debater and a dynamic public speaker. So we can start here with us. We believe in you. We need you to believe in yourself. And it's fundamental to becoming a great speaker. You have to believe that you can do it. And you'll find that once you adopt that belief, once you believe you can do it, then kind of naturally, you just sort of, you start to do it. It starts to incorporate, it starts to become part of who you are. Next, have fun. Have fun. You're supposed to enjoy this. I know sometimes we get caught up in the moments and we get caught up in things, but debate is an exercise, especially when you're in academic debates, like we're doing these BP debates. You should enjoy these. When you're doing these practice speeches, enjoy them. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. Speakers who are enjoying what they're doing are a lot more comfortable than speakers who are not. And if you're uncomfortable as a speaker, that will show. So try your best to have fun and enjoy yourself. And enjoy making the arguments, and enjoy the process, and enjoy the intellectual battle, the clash of ideas, because that is part of what it's all about. I promise you, that is part of what it's all about. And then I have one sort of final point, and I probably went a little fast, so I apologize if I've gone too fast. But I like to sort of close with what I call the 6 C's of charismatic public speaking, because I think it's important to become a dynamic public speaker, a speaker that's interesting, not boring, gives a clear, memorable speech that they like. I think it's important to have good gestures, choose the right language, but equally important, I think all speakers, and I know I do personally, want to strive to be a charismatic public speaker. What is a charismatic public speaker? A charismatic public speaker, I think, is someone that can deliver charisma almost with every speech. Most charismatic speaker I've ever heard live, President Barack Obama. A couple of months ago, I had the privilege of being witness to the president come deliver the graduation address at my school. And I'd heard President Obama speak before on television, but I'd never heard him live. I was never present at one of his speeches. And so I'm sitting in the audience, which was actually a very rainy field. It was actually a thunderstorm that day. So you had maybe 10,000 people sitting outside in the rain with ponchos and umbrellas, and we're next to big, large speakers. I can see Obama. He's kind of far away, but I can see him just sort of barely about this big from where I was sitting. But the thing that struck me the most about his speech is that as he started to deliver it, I felt the charisma through the speaker. And so it got me to thinking, well, how can we replicate that? How does he do it? How can we do it? Because everyone should want to strive to be a charismatic public speaker. And I think there's 6 keys. I think there's 6 ways to do it. I think 1, the confidence we talked about. You got to radiate joy. You got to have good posture. You have to be erect. You have to show that confidence. I think 2, you have to be comfortable. You can't be restrained or subdued with your emotions. This is something that can be uncomfortable for people who aren't used to expressing their emotions. Emotions are a good thing for public speakers. So you want to use those emotions. You don't want to keep them inside. You don't want to be restrained. You don't want to be subdued. You want to use those emotions. You want to express those emotions as a part of your speech. Feel free to let them out. But you don't want to exaggerate them either. Because if you have exaggerated emotions, what are you doing? You're not being real. And one of the first thing I told you to do is you want to be authentic in your public speeches. So show that comfort. Try to balance sort of the vulnerability and humility of showing emotions in your speech with the projection of strength as a speaker. If you do that, you're on your way to delivering a charismatic speech. Number 3, you want to try to have some correlation to the audience. You want to try to deliver some material that people can relate to. So, even in preparing this lecture, I asked Marius before lunch. I said, Marius, can you tell me some names of some public speakers that Cameroons would look up to and think were great public speakers? And he says, yeah, well, President Sarkozy of France, he's a great public speaker. I said, okay, that sounds good. And then he said, well, why'd you ask me that question? Why do you want to know? Why do you care? And the reason why I care is simple, because I want to correlate parts of my speech today to you, the audience. So whenever you give a speech, you want to be mindful of the audience that you're speaking to and try to relate that, the material to them, to the extent you can. You can't always do that. Right? Sometimes you don't really know that much about your audience. In that case, you want to try to give something, you want to try to deliver a speech that's more audience neutral, I think. Next, you want to be conscious. Consciousness, I call it. What is speaker consciousness, Professor? I've never heard of this. Consciousness, to me, is being in the moment. Being in the moment. When you're delivering a speech, you want to be in the moment. You want to pay attention to what the audience is doing. You want to pay attention to the audience's reactions to your speech. You want to stay in the moment. Don't just, you have your prepared remarks and other arguments you want to make and other things you want to say, but don't ignore who you're delivering it to. For example, if you have a judge and you're making a point and the judge is just like shaking their head like, no, he's got to be crazy. Don't ignore that. Like, you need to do something. You need to do something with that. Maybe that something is try to explain it a different way. Maybe that something is, you know what, I'm going to move on. I'm not going to put so much emphasis on that point because I don't think they're buying it. But you need to pay attention to that. You don't want to ignore that. You want to be in the moment. You want to be conscious. At the same time you're being conscious, you want to try to be immune to two things. This is hard. You want to try to be immune to criticism, right? You may give public addresses, or you may suffer, say, some head trauma, right? You may have your opponents rising, on this point, and you're waving them down like this. Get out, stop it. Try to be immune to that. You also want to try to be immune to flattery, because flattery during speeches can actually make you overconfident. And when you become too overconfident in your speeches, you may actually forget that, you know what, I still need to develop the argumentation, I still need to develop the analysis, I still need to develop the logic. Number 5, 6 C's of charismatic public speaking. Clarity. Can't stress this enough. Got to be clear. Charismatic public speakers deliver clear speeches. There's really no other way to say it. Is that clear? Get it? Okay. Finally, charm. Charm. Charm is not, it's not easily definable. Some people use wit for charm, but really I think charm is just exhibiting the traits of an attractive personality. And we talked about what those traits were of an attractive personality. So I think if you can start to work to master those 6 C's of charismatic public speaking: confidence, comfort, correlation to audience, consciousness, clarity, and charm, you're well on your way to becoming a great public speaker and giving a great public address. And I'm actually finishing a little early because I was rushing. So, if Professor Snyder doesn't mind, if anyone has any questions about anything I've said, I'd like for you to ask them now. If you have any questions about anything I've said. If I said something too fast, if I said something you didn't understand, my word choice was poor. It's okay to ask questions. It's even okay to disagree with me. Remember, this is a debate academy. Yeah.
Afternoon, sir.
Afternoon.
As you have said that a good public speaker has to be natural, does he has the right to laugh when making his speech according to the circumstances of what he's saying?
That's a great question. If I understand your question correctly, the question was, should a good public speaker laugh during his speech? Is that right? That's the question? I think the answer to that question is no. Right? When you're a public speaker, you may use humor, you may even tell a joke, but you don't want to be that guy that's laughing at his own joke. Right? The joke is not for you. The joke is for the audience. So it's okay for the audience to laugh at the joke, but I don't think you want to be in the position of laughing at your own jokes as a speaker. I don't think that makes you look very smart at all. Good question. Other questions? Yes.
You got number 3. You gave 3 keywords.
Yes.
First one was clear. Second one was credible. I missed the third. Clear, credible, and
I know what you're talking about. Let me just go back up to the top and I'll give you the rest. Oh, you're asking about the... Gotcha. Yeah, you're asking about the 6 C's of charismatic public speaking. I'll say it one more time. It's confident, comfort, correlation to audience, consciousness, clarity, and charm. Yes. Question.
Thank you. Talking about eye contact with the audience.
Yes.
In a situation where you're speaking, say, in a stadium.
Hold on one second. If I could just ask everyone, whenever someone's speaking or has the floor, if you could just try to keep the talking or chatter to a minimum, because it does two things. One, I can't hear the speaker completely, and I really want to hear the questions and be able to answer them. And two, you might really want to hear the questions because the speaker might ask, have a question that you hadn't thought of, but it's something that you might want to know about. So, sure, go ahead.
So I was talking about eye contact with the audience.
Yes.
And a situation where you are in a stadium, which is round.
Yeah.
So is it not okay to, when you're talking, turn around?
If you're in a stadium that's round, you mean a full circle or a semicircle?
Full circle.
Full circle. Okay, that's a difficult question. The reason why it's a difficult question is because if you're in a full circle, that means you're delivering a speech with your back to the audience, which is generally something that you want to try to avoid if you can, because it cuts you off completely from the audience. But I think if you're doing that, you want to give the back some attention during your speech. So I think in that situation, it's okay to turn around and give them some attention to show them that you do care about them. Now, you can't deliver your whole speech turned around to your back, because then you're just replacing the back with the front for the problem. But I think it's okay and even appropriate to take a moment during the speech and turn around and let them know, hey, I know you're behind me, I know you're watching my back, and I care about you, and I want you to get the message too. I think that's the best way to handle it. Yes, in the back. Great question.
I'm sorry I wasn't here from the very beginning. But I just need to find out, do you make a distinction in public speaking between an academic discourse and other types of speeches? Because I would imagine that composure might very easily conflict with body language and gesticulation, maybe when it comes to academic discourses. My question springs from your speech and your individual gesticulation within your speech. Are you going to give an academic discourse with the same amount of body movement?
Yeah. The answer to your question is yes and no. Would I give an academic speech with the same body movement and the same variation and the same techniques that I've discussed for great public speaking? Absolutely. Does that mean that there's not a difference between academic public speaking, say in the context of an academic debate, and other forms of public speaking? No, it doesn't. I think there are some differences. I think two that jump to spring to mind. The first difference would be conventions. Conventions and rules, let's call it. When you're in a debate, you're following certain rules. You're following certain guidelines. And so your speech is going to be tailored in the context of those rules and those guidelines. If you're giving a general public address, then those rules and those conventions don't exist. So it would be out of place, it would be out of context for you to follow rules and conventions in a situation where those rules and conventions don't apply. So you want to tailor your speech to the context. I think secondly, it makes a difference in terms of your audience. There's a big difference when your audience is, say, a crowd of debaters at a debate tournament, and your audience is the community at large. And so you want to be conscious of that as a speaker, and you want to use something we call in speech audience adaptation, which just basically means tailoring your speech to the audience itself. And I think if you do those two things, you'll find that accounts for the differences between sort of academic public speaking and public speaking in public settings. You got time for one more? One more? Okay. Right here. Yes. Please.
Thank you so much. I really wish to congratulate you for this brilliant performance and for this brilliant lecture on public speaking. I would like to find out, are there standardized patterns for non-verbal communication? Like for instance, today I discovered that instead of clapping their hands, people were hitting the table.
Yes.
So I was like, is that a particular style for debating? And I equally wish to find out, how do you manage stress patterns during debating? Like, the tone, the volume, and how do you manage all of that? And how do you manage your emotions during all this public speaking?
All right, two great questions. You asked a two-part question. The first question was, what was us doing this when the debates earlier? That is a debate convention. During parliamentary debates, particularly BP debates, instead of clapping like this when a speaker presents, when a speaker makes a good point, you slap the desk like one, because applause generally is more disruptive to a speaker than it is to slap the desk. So that's a convention that's found within, particularly within BP debate and within parliamentary debate in the United States. Your second question was really, and I'm still reframing a little bit, was how do you maintain control, as I understand? How do you deal with stress? When you're actually giving a speech and you're dealing with these physical hand gestures, these facial expressions, these emotions that you want to evoke during the speech, how do you, that can be very stressful, so how do you deal with it all? And I think the way you deal with it is, number one, trying to stay in control and not trying, oh, that's my time's up, my time. Trying to stay in control and don't try to do too much. Don't try to do more than you can handle. You want to stay within your own personal comfort zone, because again, it's not about trying to imitate or even emulate anyone else. It's the heart of good public speaking, I believe, is being yourself. But before you can do that, you have to learn who you are as a public speaker. And that's a process that takes a little time, but I'm confident if you work hard and you practice, you all can get there.
All right. We're out of time. We have to go. You have to go give speeches. Let's give it up. Thank you, Professor.